I thought I was just visiting my best friend, until his sister looked at me like she'd been waiting my whole life to arrive. I hadn't been back to my best friend's house in what felt like forever. Life had gotten busy. College, work, the usual excuses. But the moment I stepped through the door, it was as if time folded in on itself. The familiar creak of the floorboards, the faint smell of coffee mixed with old wood, the way laughter seemed to hang in the walls. It all came back instantly. But none of that prepared me for her. His sister. She appeared in the doorway to the kitchen, carrying a dish towel, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Yet, the way she looked at me wasn't ordinary at all. It was a pause, a half-second too long, a glance that seemed to hold something unsaid. I had known her since I was younger, of course. She was always the elegant presence around the house. Older, composed, beautiful in a way I never let myself think too much about. But now, standing there in the warm light, she looked at me as though the years in between had been a waiting room, and I'd finally stepped back inside. Her smile came a little late, as if she had to steady herself before offering it. "You've grown up," she said softly, her voice warm but threaded with something heavier, something I couldn't quite name. I laughed it off, trying to keep my composure, but inside, something shifted. I noticed the way her hair fell slightly over one shoulder, the way she brushed it back almost unconsciously, as though she didn't want me to miss her eyes. Those eyes had always been striking, calm, intelligent, with a depth that made you feel seen. Tonight, though, they carried a weight almost like recognition. We exchanged the simplest of greetings, yet every detail seemed magnified. The faint perfume she wore, floral with a hint of spice, lingered as she stepped closer. When she reached out to hug me, the embrace was polite, but the press of her hand against my back felt intentional, like she wasn't letting go too quickly. I tried to remind myself that I was here for my friend, not to get caught up in the way his sister was looking at me. But as I sat down in the living room, listening to my friend ramble about old times, my attention kept drifting back to the kitchen doorway. She was there, moving quietly, her presence filling the space without trying. And when our eyes met again, across the hum of conversation, she held my gaze for just a second longer than she should have. That second was enough. Enough to make my chest tighten. Enough to make me realize this wasn't the same woman I remembered from years ago, or maybe she was, and I was just seeing her differently now. Whatever it was, her look carried a truth I wasn't ready for, but couldn't ignore. She hadn't just noticed me tonight. She had been noticing me for years. Dinner at my best friend's house was always a noisy, easy thing. Jokes tossed across the table, plates passed around, memories dug up and retold for the 10th time. On the surface, nothing had changed. But beneath that laughter, there was something else moving quietly, something I couldn't ignore her. She floated through the evening with the kind of presence that drew the room toward her without effort. She wasn't trying to be noticed. She never had to. Every time she leaned across the table to pour water, every time her sleeve brushed the edge of my hand as she passed a plate, it felt deliberate even if it wasn't. And maybe that was the dangerous part, how natural it all seemed. I caught myself watching her in fragments. The way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear while listening to my friend's story. The way her eyes softened when she laughed. The way she bit her lower lip, just briefly, as if steadying a thought she didn't speak aloud. And then there was the moment her gaze flickered to mine. Quick, almost shy, but long enough that I felt it in my chest like a spark. It wasn't a bold, obvious attraction. It was the smallness of it that made it powerful. A glance that lingered half a beat too long. A smile that curved like it carried a secret. Every time her eyes found mine, I couldn't tell if she was trying to hide something, or letting me see exactly what she wanted me to. At one point, as she handed me a glass, her fingers brushed mine. It was nothing, just an accident. But the warmth of that touch stayed long after the glass was in my hand. My friend didn't notice. He was busy telling a story about our college days. But I had to lower my eyes to keep from giving myself away. The house felt alive with these quiet undercurrents. The clatter of silverware, the hum of music in the background, the faint echo of laughter from the television in the next room. It all blurred compared to the awareness that pulsed between us. She would look away quickly, busy herself with something small, yet I could sense it. She was just as aware of me as I was of her. After dinner, we moved into the living room. My friend sprawled out, comfortable, launching into another story. I nodded along, but my focus drifted again. She walked in carrying a tray of tea, and when she set it down, her hand grazed my shoulder. Light, casual, but lingering half a second too long. My heart answered before I could stop it. When she finally sat down, across from me, her eyes found mine once more. This time, she didn't look away quickly. The room seemed to dim, voices fading around us, as though some invisible thread stretched tight between her and me. In that moment, later that night, the rhythm of the house shifted. My best friend excused himself, disappearing down the hallway with the careless promise of being right back. The moment the door clicked behind him, the atmosphere changed. It wasn't dramatic, just a quiet tilting of balance. Suddenly, it was just her and me. She was standing by the counter, drying the last of the glasses, the soft yellow light of the kitchen haloing her hair. I should have offered to help, but I found myself just watching the way she moved, the way she hummed under her breath like she didn't realize anyone was listening. "You've grown into yourself," she said at last, glancing at me over her shoulder. Her words were casual, but her tone wasn't. There was weight behind them, as though she wasn't talking about height or age but something deeper. I chuckled, awkward but sincere. "Guess that's one way to put it. I'm not the kid who used to raid your fridge anymore." That made her laugh low, warm, the kind of laugh that curled into the air and stayed there. She leaned against the counter, crossing her arms, her eyes scanning me in a way that felt far more deliberate than polite curiosity. "You always had a way of noticing things," she said softly. "Even back then, you paid attention when no one else did." Her words landed deeper than I expected. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. "Maybe that's because you were worth noticing." The silence that followed was alive, charged with all the things we weren't saying. She tilted her head, studying me, as though she was trying to decide if I really meant it. I did, every word. Her expression softened, almost vulnerable. "Do you know how rare that is? To feel seen." She didn't finish the thought, but she didn't need to. The air between us carried the rest. I stepped closer, not too close, just enough that the distance no longer felt like a wall. "You've always seemed untouchable," I admitted. "Like you were in a world I wasn't old enough to reach." Her breath caught faintly, and she looked away for the first time, as though my words had unsettled her. But then, slowly, she turned back, her eyes finding mine with a quiet intensity that rooted me in place. "Maybe you've reached it now," she whispered. The clock in the living room ticked louder than it should have. The faint hum of the refrigerator filled the silence. Yet none of it mattered. The only thing I could hear was the thrum of my own pulse and the softness of her voice lingering in my chest. We didn't touch. We didn't move. But the distance between us had changed forever. For the first time, it felt like we weren't just speaking as my best friend's sister and his friend. We were two people standing on the edge of something neither of us had expected, yet both of us felt. And neither of us dared to look away. The night stretched on, the kind of quiet that settles over a house when most of it has gone to sleep. My best friend was upstairs by then, his door shut, leaving the downstairs wrapped in a hush broken only by the faint hum of the dishwasher. I stayed behind in the kitchen, helping her tidy what was left of dinner. At least that was the excuse. She stood at the counter, stacking plates, while I wiped down the table. Our movements should have been routine, but nothing about it felt ordinary. Every step closer, every sideways glance, every pause lingered longer than necessary. When she turned with a handful of silverware, I reached out at the same moment. Our hands touched. Not the brief brush from before, but palm against palm, warm and startling. She didn't pull away. For the space of a breath, we just stood there, hands overlapping on a pile of forks, the silence humming with everything unspoken. Finally, she let out a quiet laugh, soft and a little shaky. Seems we're not very coordinated. But her eyes said something different. They lingered on mine, as though she was asking a question she didn't dare put into words. I smiled, though my pulse was pounding in my ears. Or maybe we just keep ending up in the same place. She set the silverware down slowly, carefully, as though her fingers were reluctant to leave mine. And then, as if she'd caught herself in something too revealing, she turned her attention back to the counter. But it was too late. The air between us had already shifted. I moved closer, carrying plates to the sink beside her. Our shoulders brushed. This time she didn't lean away. Instead, she stilled, her breath catching faintly, as though she'd been expecting it but hadn't prepared for how it would feel. "You've always noticed more than you should," she murmured, almost to herself, though the words were meant for me. I froze, the plate in my hand forgotten. Her tone wasn't playful. It was layered, with history, with something she'd carried quietly for too long. I turned, meeting her gaze fully. Maybe I couldn't help it. Her lips curved into a smile, small and tremulous. She looked down at the counter, brushing a crumb away with her fingertips, though the gesture felt more like a way to steady herself than to clean. My eyes followed the movement. How delicate, how intentional even in its nervousness. The space between us seemed impossibly small, though we hadn't moved any closer. I could feel the warmth radiating from her, the awareness pulling us like a tide. And though nothing more happened, no kiss, no confession, the weight of that nearness was stronger than either of those things. For the first time, I realized it wasn't just me holding back. She was holding back too, and maybe she had been for years. And in that quiet kitchen, with nothing but dishes and silence between us, the truth pressed in so closely it was almost touch itself. The night had thinned into that strange hour where silence feels heavier, where even the air seems to wait. We sat close, too close, on the old couch in the dimly lit living room. The lamp in the corner cast a golden pool that caught the edge of her face, softening her features, drawing my gaze again and again. We had been talking in hushed tones, voices low as if afraid of being overheard, though the house was quiet. She told me stories of her travels, her small triumphs, her regrets. I told her things I'd never admitted to anyone, words spilling out because her presence made honesty easy. But after a while, words became unnecessary. What lingered was silence, dense and alive. Her hand rested on her knee, close enough that if I shifted slightly, our fingers would touch. I could feel the magnetic pull, every nerve in my body aware of that small distance. My chest tightened with the effort of holding still. Finally, she turned toward me. Her eyes, luminous in the soft light, held mine with a rawness that left no room for pretending. I saw it, longing, hesitation, and something deeper, something that had been waiting far longer than tonight. I leaned forward instinctively, breath catching, and she mirrored me. We stopped a heartbeat away from each other, the nearness so charged it felt like the air itself might break. I could feel her breath warm against my lips, could almost taste the inevitability of it. And then she froze. Her forehead dropped lightly against mine, her breath uneven. Her hand lifted, trembling just slightly, and came to rest over mine. The warmth of her palm pressed into me like a confession. "We shouldn't," she whispered, her voice breaking against the quiet. "You know we shouldn't." I closed my eyes, inhaling the truth in her words, but also the way her hand tightened over mine as though begging me not to let go. "I know," I whispered back, "but I can't stop wanting to." The silence that followed was louder than anything we could have said. My pulse hammered, hers matched it, and for a long, fragile moment we simply stayed like that, foreheads touching, breaths mingling, caught in the impossible pull of what we both feared and craved. Her thumb brushed across the back of my hand, slow, almost reverent. "If this happens," she said quietly, "nothing will ever be the same." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words pressing deep. "Maybe it's not supposed to be the same." She let out a trembling laugh, half joy, half ache, and tilted her face as if about to close the distance. But then she stopped again, her restraint stronger than her desire. So we didn't kiss. Not yet. Instead, we sat there bound in the ache of what almost happened, what nearly spilled over, what both of us knew was coming. And in that pause, suspended between restraint and surrender, I realized something. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the ones where everything happens, but where nothing does, because you know it will. Eventually the house had fallen completely silent by the time we stepped outside. The air was cool, the kind of night that felt both endless and fleeting. Above us, the stars stretched wide and clear, their quiet shimmer watching as though they knew what we carried between us. She wrapped her arms around herself at first, not from cold, but from hesitation. I wanted to offer my jacket, but it wasn't the jacket she needed. It was honesty, something real to stand on after all the silence we had lived in. We stood side by side on the porch, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of her presence. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The crickets filled the space, the faint glow of a street lamp spilled across her profile, and I felt the weight of 1,000 unsaid words pressing at the edge of my chest. Finally, she broke the silence. "You know this changes everything." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her. The flicker of fear, the flicker of hope. I nodded. "I don't want to pretend it doesn't anymore." She looked at me then, really looked, as if she was testing the ground beneath her feet. For years she had probably carried this in quiet, convincing herself it was impossible, that it was just a passing thought. But tonight there was no denying it. We had seen too much, felt too much. I reached for her hand, slowly, giving her every chance to pull away. She didn't. Her fingers slid into mine as though they had been waiting for that moment all along. The warmth of her touch was steadying, grounding, a silent acknowledgement that she was done hiding too. Her shoulders eased, the tension breaking just a little. She let out a soft laugh, almost disbelieving, and shook her head. "This shouldn't make sense." "Maybe not," I said quietly. "But it feels right." Her gaze softened at that, and for the first time all night, her smile reached her eyes fully. She stepped a little closer, our hands still entwined, her body turning toward mine like it had been pulled there by something far stronger than choice. We didn't kiss, not the way stories usually end. Instead, she leaned her head against my shoulder, letting the silence speak for us. I rested my cheek lightly against her hair, breathing in the faint trace of her perfume, the warmth of her trust. It was more than enough. In that moment under the stars, there was no need for promises or declarations. What we shared was quieter than that, deeper than that. It wasn't about rushing into something reckless. It was about finally admitting we had found something that had been there all along. We stayed like that, hand in hand, watching the night stretch out ahead of us. The future was uncertain, yes, but the connection was undeniable, and neither of us wanted to run from it anymore. For the first time, we weren't just holding back, we were holding on. I knew this wasn't my imagination. Something had begun, quietly, beneath the ordinary noise of the evening. If this story touched you, don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more slow burn romances. Share it with someone who loves stories about unexpected connections. And let me know in the comments how this ending made you feel.